I learned in my experience in Washington, D.C. that we start when we're ready and we quit when we're finished. And I learned also that you need to figure out how to put a period on a sermon or a presentation. I've heard a lot of sermons where it seemed to me that they didn't know how to put a period on it. But, so I know how to do that, and I'm going to do that. I heard a preacher once begin by saying, I want to say something before I speak. So, I'm going to say something before I speak. Okay? Black churches matter. Amen? Black churches matter. Can we say that? Black pastors matter. Can we say that?
Could you show it on?
Let me pull it in a little closer. Black Nazarenes matter. Can we say that? I put up a blog last week on comment from 1992 Rodney King. You may remember that. After the riots broke out and police officers were acquitted, and Rodney King, famous question, can we just get along? After I put that blog up Tuesday, I got a call from a white friend that I've known for many years. He reads his stuff, it's back to me. And I didn't say anything in that blog about Black Lives Matter. That's what he heard. And he went on and on, protesting. And when he slowed down a little bit, I said, I've not heard anybody say only Black Lives Matter. Have you heard that? I told him I have a lot of acquaintances in the African American community. And I checked around and I haven't heard that from anybody. Where did you hear that from? Well, he stumbled around. I said, if it says anything, if you're going to add a word to it, the word is simply Black Lives Matter too. Because if you understand the history of this country, Black lives have often been, if not most of the time, valued. And means together for God's kingdom, as the Church of Nazarene, Black Nazarene churches matter. Right? Black Nazarene pastors matter. Simply Black Nazarenes matter. Now, all Nazarenes matter, we know that. But here in this and after we need, I believe, to be on a united effort. Let it be known that this matters to all of us. Okay, now I've said something before. Hand out an outline here. Really, it's a series of statements and questions, and I've used this. Go ahead. I've used this outline in doing some organizational development, and I think it can be applied in this setting. So you get these handouts. You'll see that there are three words that I'd like to focus on. The words are context, assumptions, and strategies. The word context really comes to me more recently in a book by Barbara Kellerman, printed last year, called Hard Times, Leadership in America, in which she makes the case that leadership in the United States at this particular time, second decade of the 20th century, 21st century, is especially difficult for a number of reasons. And among others, she said that you have to pay attention to the context of America to understand your own particular situation. If you ignore the context, and I would say the meta-context, that are the things that are going on around you that affect your life, whether you know it or not. And leaders ignore the meta-context at their peril, because their particular context is being affected by this meta-context. And she has a checklist of about 20 major things that are affecting all of our lives and all of our institutions. I did a review of the book for Grace and Peace, and thanks Dr. Bob Roswell for Grace and Peace. And Brian McLaughlin edits that, but the department is sending this out. It's a great piece, and I've handed out copies of that to folks, and it's one of our best publications. Thanks, Bob. But in the last issue, Brian asked me to do a review of this book, and I adapted it for pastors. I took about 10 things out of Barbara Kellerman's book, applied it to pastoral ministry, and then did an interview with several pastors. And you can see the text of that interview, but you can also link up to the video and watch that interview. So the last issue of Grace and Peace has got that in there. And so it's a focus on this book, Barbara Kellerman's book, Hard Times, Why Leadership is Difficult in the Second Decade of the 21st Century. Among other things, I think, she says, the one overarching meta-context issue is social media. And social media is affecting everything we do in ways that we don't even understand. And it's changing so rapidly. If you don't understand social media and understand how to use it and how to keep it from using you to your disadvantage, you're going to be behind in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. I would suggest to you right now, for this context, this conference, and for the whole effort to start and strengthen African American churches, the major contextual issue in America right now is in the CBS New York Times poll that came out this last month, that 69% of Americans think that race relationships in America are bad and getting worse. And I've got a reference to that article, to that Pew Charitable Trust research in the last blog that I did. My website is at the top. If you want to go to that website, you can see the blog, and there's a link to the New York Times CBS poll, and it elaborates on that, and it says that race relations haven't been this bad since the LA riots following the acquittal of those officers for Rodney King. Now, the opinions go up and down depending on what is going on in society, but we are right now in that particular place where the majority, 69% of Americans, black Americans and white Americans, have very different perspectives on what's going on. So you need to understand that. But overall, the majority of Americans say race relationships in this country are bad and getting worse. Now, whatever we say about reaching and including African Americans in the Church of Nazarene, it is said in that context. And it does affect who we are as Nazarenes together, and it affects our outreach in how we are viewed and perceived. So, my question to you is, what outside influences affect this conference and efforts to increase the presence and influences of blacks in the Church of Nazarene? I've identified one contextual issue. If we had time, the ideal way to go through this would be to have all of you participate in the discussion. What do you see as an overarching contextual issue that affects what you are trying to do in supporting the purpose and part of this conference is to advance and to recognize the importance of black people in the Church of Nazarene. Hold that question for a moment, we'll come back to it. Think about it for a moment. What are the issues? I've given you one, which I think is the overarching issue for our political campaign, for the presidential politics, is this cultural divide in the United States at this moment, which is as bad as it's ever been. Now, I happen to believe that the church is the one place where there is a possibility of healing and bridging the divide and healing the broken relationships. But we're going to have to work at it because it won't be natural. I mean, it's not going to happen without effort because the headwinds are so heavy against us. Black and white people look at one another in the shopping malls, in the stores. We eye one another and we wonder, what is she thinking? What does he think? We don't know. Part of the problem is there are so very few places where we have opportunity for candid conversation. We're afraid. I can tell you a lot of white folks are afraid of black people. Yeah. And vice versa. We're afraid of one another. We haven't had, even when we sit next to one another on the subway or the bus or the plane, we're not quite sure. And when these events occur, it just heightens that uncertainty and anxiety at times. Now, I know enough black people who've been working at this for a long time. I did a little poll. I called a few folks. I just want to check in. As far as I can tell, unless people are really messing with me, if you've got long-term relationships, the public hostility is not going to affect those relationships. I mean, be at peace about that. You don't have to worry about the friendships and the relationships that you have established and you nurtured through the years. Affected by the media, and that's a part of this. We're affected by what we see, what we hear, violence and so forth, our profile, that becomes more newsworthy than positive relationships. But you can be at peace. I think we can, and if we have taken time. And it takes time to build trust. You don't build that overnight. As Mark Twain once said, when you need a friend, it's too late to find or build one. You know, friendships take a long time. And so building positive relationships is not a quick fix. But unless we do it, we can't do anything else. You can't resolve a problem if you're in a room full of angry people or hostile people. You have to lay the groundwork in positive relationships, yes. Because as Christians, we should have to. Let me just add to that. I've done a lot of work through an organization I started years ago, the Institute for Racial Reconciliation. And basically, I did it to talk to white folks. I didn't know I had anything to say to black people about getting their lives together, but I have got a lot to say to my white brothers and sisters about getting their lives together. And once in a while, somebody would say, well, since we're believers, you know, and I said, let me tell you something. Every bad thing that was done in America through slavery was done in Jesus' name. You got to be very careful about how you bring your faith into this discussion. This month is the 200th anniversary of the AME Church. Richard Allen, a former slave, was forcefully removed from his congregation in Philadelphia. And that was the beginning of the organized black church in America 200 years ago in Philadelphia. We need to remember that the black church emerged because of exclusion. And when we come together, we have to be careful about assuming that we can just say, well, as Christians, everybody ought to get along. I believe that. But the record is otherwise. All right, the history is the meta context. The history of America's race relationships, 200 years, slavery, Jim Crow segregation, civil rights movement. This is the context that affects everything we do when we come together and talk about a white denomination trying to be more inclusive. Well, let me move on. Assumptions. I learned this from auditors. In a nonprofit organization, when you have an audit, the auditors will come in and the first question they'll ask is, what are the assumptions at work at this organization? We can't give you a good audit unless we know what's going on. Now, I wish we had time for you to respond to this question. What are the assumptions at work among us? And I've made an attempt to identify 2 or 3. You may not agree with these, but at least it's a start. I'm assuming that everybody in this room is agreed that the mission of the Church of the Nazarene is multicultural and international. Now, we're not going to debate that, but that's an assumption that we come with, I come with, and I presume we would agree on. Another assumption, the Church of the Nazarene needs and wants to strengthen and start black churches. I know a lot of DSs, I know a lot of pastors, I know General Sheriff. I think everybody is agreed on that. I've never heard anybody say anything other than that. That's an assumption that we bring into the room. An assumption we want to encourage and support black pastors and leaders. Now, it may not always happen, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. I'm making that statement as an assumption that it's not just in this conference, but throughout the denomination. We can assume, black and white people together, that we are agreed on encouraging and supporting black pastors and leaders. Another statement which builds on that, the Church of the Nazarene needs and wants to do better. And that is a confession of sorts, that we haven't done as well as we'd like to do. It's good to confess once in a while, isn't it? And if individuals need to repent occasionally, so does the church. And sometimes the church has stumbled. It is a human institution, and when it does, we need to repent. And God can, I heard a preacher once talk about getting the church sanctified. Individuals, we need to get sanctified, but some churches need to get sanctified. You ever seen anything like that? They just do. So, the Church of the Nazarene needs and wants to do better at including African Americans who make up 13% or 40 million of the population. If you look at our data, about 70% of Nazarenes in the United States and Canada are English-speaking white. And then the balance of 30% is spread out. And the largest single non-Hispanic white population is Hispanic. And that's growing because of the rapid immigrant population. All right, the next step of this, assuming that the Church of the Nazarene needs and wants to do better at including African Americans who make up 13% or 40 million people of our population. The third word is strategy. And the question that follows, how can the Church of the Nazarene attract and include African Americans? Now, my guess is, if I turn this microphone over to a few of you, you can take the rest of the time all day long to let us know what you think the Church of the Nazarene could do. Now, I'm not talking at this moment about individual congregations. That's another discussion. And we need to talk about that. And And there's lots that can be said, and some of you have experience, and we could all pool our experience in monocultural, multicultural, integrated congregations, congregations of all black people with all white people. It's a very complex discussion. There are two things going on in American society. It's the melting pot, in a way. But you've got integration and segregation going on at the same time, all of the time. In fact, sometimes you have it going on within any individual. I remember in Washington, D.C., Anacostia was a part of town across the river where there were very few white people. And some of the black people once in a while would say, you know, I just love going to Anacostia where I don't have to see any white folks. You know? And I understand that. You know, sometimes you just want to be with your own people, your own family. There's something good about that. It's not necessarily bad. In the church, people make choices all of the time, and people choose churches based on belief and culture. They're curious, they're interested in what are the beliefs, but what is the culture? Martin Luther King said that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. And when he said that, he was saying that in the context of segregation and the civil rights movement. Interesting thing, after all of these years, the same thing is true now. I saw an article by Ed Stetzer recently, Christianity Today, in which he repeated that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week, and most church people like it that way. And his point was that people make choices about where they go to church. And sometimes that looks like segregation, but it's not exclusion. It's not saying you can't come to this church. It's just saying this is the church we prefer. Now I'm going to get off track a little bit here. When I wrote that book, Changing Face of the Church in 1997, I was still working with the assumption that it's all right to have ethnic-specific churches unless they're white. And no white church should be ethnic-specific because the assumption would be you're all white because you're excluding people. And that has been true through much of our history. But it's not true now. There may be some churches that are excluding overtly or covertly, but very few. The fact is that people are making choices, and we should affirm every group of people who are authentically Christian, regardless of the makeup of their congregation. We need to let go of the guilt and quit beating up on one another because our church doesn't look like what we think it ought to look like, and just say it is what it is. Whoever this body of people are, whatever their color, their ethnicity, their language, who have come together, are the people who need to be together at this moment. And we have to be sure that they pass the authenticity test for Christian community, which is everybody's included. And we are more alike than we're different. I could go on and on about that. All right. Assuming what I've said is near the truth, what is the strategy? That's the question for any organization. What's the context? What are the assumptions at work within this organization? And then what is our strategy? So I'm going to offer 2 or 3 things. And we may have a moment here. I'm going to say, pardon me? Okay, one strategy is to come together more. Right. All right. Let's go. Let me go through 2 or 3 meetings, and you be ready to add to this or comment on it. I would say, if the Church of Nazarene wants to attract and retain African Americans, you can't do it for the sake of looking integrated. You can't say to black people, we want you to be a part of this white organization because it will make us look better. That's not going to work. Nobody's going to be impressed. Nobody. Now, I would have to say, I got into a few situations where I had people say, I need a white person. Will you come and be the white person? And I did. I said, okay, I can do that. If that helps your cause, if your cause is right, I don't mind doing that. But I'm not going to use that as a strategy for where we want to go as far as the church is concerned. So it's got to be for real. It can't be, you can't be playing games with this with people and just saying, we want you because you have this certain color or this certain language or culture or whatever. It's got to be a genuine effort to be inclusive. Yes, you want to say. And race is a purely sociological, human distinction. It's not biological. In our DNA, we are much more alike. And there's as much difference between a tall person and a short person as there is between a black person and a white person. In our DNA, we are all one. There's just one human race. And so we have been affected by a social construction, which you have to recognize. You can't wish it away. You have to realize this is the meta-context that's affecting everything we do. The meta-context in America is one drop of blood. And that's, when the government to try to decide who's black and who's white, that was the legal definition. Totally subjective. Human consideration. It has nothing to do with biology or theology. But that's where we live, folks. We live in that environment, and we have to learn how to handle it and bring in our theology. When we get to heaven, none of those distinctions will apply anyway. So it's God's kingdom as Jesus. In the Lord's Prayer, we pray for the kingdom to come now as it will be. So, I'll forget where to put a period myself. Okay, let me get to the first one. First thing I would say for the denomination to attract and retain is to stay on message. I've done a little poll in the past, and it hasn't been official, but I've listened carefully. When I talk to my white brothers, particularly pastors in ministry, and I listen carefully, why are you a Nazarene? I get a different answer when and I've done this with a lot of black pastors for the years. Given the givens, the meta context, I'd say, why would you want to be a part of a majority white denomination? Why are you a Nazarene? The answer I would give almost always from the black pastors was the message. It's the message. From the white guys, often it was the church has been good to me. And I would have to say that's my thing. The church has been very good to me. I mean, from my grandparents, my parents, my education, the opportunities it provided. I just hope and pray that the church can be as good to everyone else as it has been to me. And I'm going to give my life to ensure that happens to the degree that I can. I want the church, I want everybody to be able to say the church has been good to me. But a lot of the pastors I've talked to wouldn't want to say that. But they would say, I believe in the message. And I'm staying with it. So I would say it can't be simply trying to look like American. It's got to be, we are on a cause to spread scriptural holiness throughout the land and reform the nation. It's got to be the message. Stay on message. Don't let anything else get us off message, or we're not going to be able to do this. Don't stereotype. Black people need to know that they will be welcome in any Nazarene church. We need to say this because if the effort to start and sustain black churches is to tell black people we have churches for people who look like you, it's not going to work. Every church. And I would just say the effort to strengthen and start African American churches has got to be the project of all of the church. It can't be just the Black Strategy Committee. You can't turn it over to a few folks and say, this is your job, we're going to go on with the main. No, the main job for all of our churches is to be sure that when anybody of any language, culture, color of skin walks into any church, they are always welcome. And that's going to take work because not everybody gets it. But we're not going to be successful in building and strengthening black churches if it's just the black pastors that are carrying that message. The white pastors, the white DSs, the white general superintendents, all of us in the whole structure of the church have got to take this up as the main, as what we're about in multicultural, pluralistic America. It has to be the agenda for everything. Can't stereotype. I was in a church Sunday, one of the most vibrant churches I've been in a while, Crossroads Church in Ellicott City, Maryland. 3 services on Sunday, exciting music, very multicultural, lots of black families, Hispanic families in the mix of all of this. What an exciting church that is there. But I'm looking around. Why do these black people want to be in this church? Something's going on there. There's the Spirit of the Lord. They're not there trying to integrate the church. Maybe they feel like that. I don't think so. As I looked around, they were engaged. This is their church. And it's not that and the church isn't necessarily trying to look integrated. It just said, you're in the neighborhood, you're welcome, here you are, let's get together. We can't assume that all black pastors want to pastor an inner city ghetto church. Okay? I know some black pastors who, that's not me. That's not what God has called me to do. I had this discussion with James Hayward a while ago, and he took on the church there, of course, in Annandale, Virginia. Black pastor of a white church, suburban church. This is where he's at home. He's doing well. So sometimes we've stereotyped people in lots of ways. We've got to be very careful if we're going to attract African Americans into a predominantly white denomination. Us white folks and black folks too have got to really work against stereotyping one another. So everybody is always welcome everywhere, all the time. Build strategic partnerships. Leaders with cross-cultural relationships. Now, I'm talking about personal experience here, but I went into a black neighborhood. I knew I could not trust my white instincts. You're going a long time, but I built some strategic partnerships, and I went to some people who were my peers, education, profession, and so forth, black people, and I said, I want you to help me. I'm not always sure of my footing in this neighborhood. Will you tell me when I'm off base? Will you tell me when I've said something that I shouldn't have said or used some reference, or I'm doing something that's unacceptable? I would say for all of us, black and white, you need to create those strategic personal partnerships where you got somebody from across the barrier who will be honest with you and will tell you like it is, and you're not afraid of ruining the relationship. That takes work. But I never had anybody turn me down when I went to somebody and said, will you help me? Be sure and observe what I'm doing and saying. And if there's any time that I need to be corrected, please speak up. I could go on and on. 5 minutes, all right. Let's see what else here. 3 minutes. Well, increasing the presence and influence of African Americans in the Church of Nazarene is only going to happen with a very determined, intentional strategy. And I've got a thing about horizontal and vertical structures. It's got to be more than the vertical structures, which are our districts. Horizontal structures cut across districts, and this is one kind of thing. But we've got to be very strategic. Given the headwinds in society today, denominational leaders need to gather together and think deeply and dedicate the resources that are needed with these assumptions. This is what we want to do. Not every congregation is going to look like America, but the denomination can. And it should. In every event, the platform needs to look like America. Congregations are going to be more ethnic specific. The most multicultural district that I've been on is the Metro New York district. There is no majority group on that district. When you come together, it looks like New York City, United Nations. But that's happened after very intentional work through the years. I can remember when it wasn't like that. So it's not going to happen naturally. It will happen as we together in our tribe, Nazarene, determine these are our assumptions, and here are the strategies.